Good evening, everyone. I know you must be very tired after 2 days of talks and brainstorming. So, welcome to this session. As you heard the title, it's about preserving the icy edge, rethinking climate action for Arctic biodiversity. So, my name is Archana Singh. I'm a scientist from National Center for Polar and Ocean Research. I'll be moderating this session. And before we start the session, let me just briefly describe what it is about. Biodiversity defines an ecosystem. It encompasses flora, fauna, plants and animals, and even microbes. Those who might have heard the biodiversity talk in the Mumtaz Hall might have heard it already. So Arctic has a unique biodiversity, specially adapted to its cold, icy, and extreme environment, interlinked through a complex food web, and also to the other parts of the world via global ocean circulation, migratory birds and animals, and interlinked climate systems. Locally, this biodiversity supports the food security and economy of the Arctic countries. And as we just heard in the Mumtaz Hall, it also provides us a study basis where we can study the adaptability in the organisms who thrive in these extreme environments for human benefit. However, as the climate change is drastically transforming Arctic landscapes, the region's fragile biodiversity is now facing potentially irreversible damage to its ecosystem and biodiversity. So this session is not to sit back and be gloomy about the damages, but to proactively rethink about the actions we can take to preserve the Arctic biodiversity, which needs a multidimensional approach anchored in global cooperation, technological innovation, and fit-for-purpose financing models, as adaptive solutions, scalable interventions, and path towards building a climate-resilient society. So, without taking much time, let's start with our speakers. I would like to open the floor for the speakers with a very broad questions, and I would like you to take 2 minutes of yours. According to you, which are the losses and damages you think are the very much linked to the Arctic biodiversity, which are being attributed to the climate change? Shall we start, Mr. Sean?
Sure. Well, if I look at my experience in the north, it's clear that the frontier is moving north. Of course, the Arctic in Canada is really, really big. In Quebec, it's 72% of our territory that is over the 49 parallel. So, with all the expedition that we did with scientists, we saw that the frontier is always moving north, and also the competition between species from the south is really something that we observe. For example, around Hudson Bay, there's no more Arctic cod. It's replaced by freelance that small fish more around Newfoundland, for example. The polar bear has no more ice in summer to hunt seals, and the effect is not only on biodiversity but also on hunters who really need to hunt. Just to give you an idea, there's 62% of insecurity, food insecurity, in the Arctic right now. So we have to be honest. The species that are specialized in ice will disappear at one point. Not everywhere, because it's going to start by the south of the Arctic, but there's no way that they will be able to survive. I saw a polar bear trying to hunt walrus. It's not exactly like a beard seal, So, and they not always win, of course. So we will see lots of damage, and it's going to be something that it's going to be really difficult to bring back those species. What we saw also is a polar bear cannot just move north. because of course there's all other population of polar bear there, and they're well adapted to their environment, so they will not win. So that moving of the frontier of the Arctic always north and more north is a real problem, and it's gonna affect the entire life cycle in the Arctic, including people who live there and needs to hunt for their food. So
Yeah, I think well justified and well defined. Professor David's daughter.
Yes, thank you. I want to just continue on what you started, because we have to remember when we're talking about, because you asked about loss and damage. And we normally phrase that in the context of the impact on humans. And let's keep in mind that, yes, the Arctic is not perhaps the most biodiverse, if that's a word, sort of region in the world. There are about 21,000 species in the Arctic. But the 4 million people that live in the Arctic rely on them. They rely on those fragile ecosystems and these really vulnerable species. They rely on them for food, but they also rely on them for their livelihoods. And they also have an enormous cultural significance, spiritual significance, that we actually can't monetize, Well, maybe we can, but it is difficult to monetize. And that is something that we cannot just financially compensate, There are no technological fixes for this. So that is something that we always need to think about this in the context of course, the humans that live there, if we're discussing loss and damage. So let's keep that in mind. But I am from Iceland, and I wanted to bring the conversation a bit there, even though, we don't, we're not really in the Arctic, but we're almost in the Arctic. But we are seeing very similar impacts as we've been discussing here today. Our glaciers are melting, about 19%, they have thinned about 19% in the last few decades, which is quite serious, with the same consequences we've been discussing here today, with the glacial lakes forming, causing all kinds of natural hazards. But I wanted to also mention one natural hazard that has not been mentioned here today, and neither yesterday, or I don't think so, and that is when the glaciers recede, at least in Iceland, what happens is that we expect to see an enormous increase in volcanic activity in Iceland. And this is going to have implications for the entire world, because these are big volcanoes that we are waiting for being reactivated, let me put it that way. In terms of species being cornered, we are seeing species migrating north out of our, for example, economic zone. Very commercially important species are leaving. And we are seeing bird populations crash. For example, so those of you that have been to Iceland, you may recall you see puffins. Exactly. You see puffins all over the place. You see them. We even call stores, tourist stores, the puffin stores. That's what Icelanders call them. But we're seeing the puffins leave. They're almost becoming rare in the south of Iceland, because the fish they feed on are moving north. And then in the end, they will be cornered in the north. So we have these consequences already visible in Iceland, and they will simply get more pronounced as climate change continues. So.
excellent.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Swapan.
Yes, thank you very much. Firstly, thank you for inviting me on this for this very important discussion and an opportunity to be on this panel. I think what I'd like to highlight is that the biodiversity to me actually is a term that signifies the interconnectedness of all living systems, which includes humans across culture, across geographies. It's very important to, I think about this as loss and damage impact or or event that will not only affect locally people in the Arctic or locally biodiversity in the Arctic, but has much more far-reaching consequences that we probably don't even know right now. Two specific examples that I want to talk about. One is that almost 25% of all migratory birds in the world actually either nest in or visit the Arctic at some point of time. As a community, we still don't even know the ecological functions that these birds carry out for us as a global community. We all know that their migration is very important for the passage of species, for evolution. That's one example. The second is this whole idea of the relationship between traditional community-based practices of sustainable land use management, the how climate change is affected by them and affects them, and what it means in terms of unsustainable land use change. We work a lot in the Himalayas. We have projects across the entire chain of Himalayas, and I've been reading with great interest since the last 2 days that our tribal communities in the Himalayas and many indigenous communities in the Arctic area both feel that this concept of human coexistence with nature and the relationship not only being about using nature but also giving back to nature is central to their existence. The last example I want to close with, which actually builds on all of this, is this whole idea of the permafrost. Statistics show that the permafrost, including ancient carbon, holds about 1800 gigatons of CO2. That's 1.8 trillion tons. That's several hundred times of emissions of most countries in the world, including India, like annual emissions. It also says that the Arctic, through its vegetation, through its tundra forests, and through soil, permafrost is basically soil, used to sequester about 180 million tons of CO2 every year. In the last 4 years, because the warming there is 4 times of the rest of the world, it's actually turned a net emitter. So now it's emitting about 100 million tons every year, and soon it'll emit 200 million tons of carbon every year. So what used to be a net sink of carbon for the whole world, because of actions and consequences of actions of others, is now a net source. And this factor is now being called the Arctic amplification. Basically, if we are able to, if we end up emitting 1.8 trillion tons of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, we have undone everything that we have done since the beginning of the Kyoto Protocol till today, through human action on carbon sequestration and avoidance, and many more times. And if now, as she's saying, it means more volcanic emissions, we haven't even counted what that means.
That's
We
actually
haven't.
cooling.
That's actually cooling.
Yeah, that's cooling.
Well, I'm sorry. But there is so many other things that will follow with the ocean currents changing and all of that. So I think that this interconnectedness, that the loss and damage that emanates from lack of management of biodiversity and its relationship to land use in the Arctic is not a local but a global issue that affects human communities, is sort of the final message that I'd like to convey. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Swapna. Dr. Shulagna.
Thank you, Archana. So similar to what he is saying, but I have categorized 3. So basically, why are we talking about this? Because climate change is like, from geological timescales, it's happening, but the intensity or the time period that it's taking to do what it's doing, it's not giving us time to adapt. So the idea about things going away comes from that we are likely to lose a lot, and we haven't accounted for what we are likely to lose. So I'm going to take some climate things, like he talked about Arctic amplification. So I can start with, the wobbling of the Arctic polar vortex. Take an example of what it's done in the Arctic, take an example of what it's done in the Himalaya. So basically, the idea is to push through that the global system is collapsing. There is something wrong globally. It's not intermittent things that's happening, something going extinct there, some apex species, some apex species going extinct, maybe the snow leopard, but things like that are happening in a global context, and that is what is very, very scary. So for example, we are not talking about the SIDS, the small island developing nations, that are probably going to go under. So we are not, so it's all together. Nothing is apart. Arctic is not one, nothing is in isolation. We are all in it together. So now if we can just take 2 or 3 things. First is like the wobbling Arctic polar vortex is about the Siberian heat wave that, like he said, we had about wildfires again related to permafrost also, that burning over 18 million hectares. Now, the data is different, but the fact is something happened there as a wildfire. In India, the same kind of polar vortexes, the wobbling of it, created the Kedarnath flood, which we know killed 6,000 people, and it was loss and damage. So the topic is, basically we've lost 6,000 people. So that is how we understand that something in the atmosphere is disrupted and we've lost that many people, and it's impacting both places. Then if we take Arctic amplification, he's already touched on, he's talked about polar bears. Polar bears is, it is, the habitat loss is quite extreme, and Canada has most of the polar bears that the world has really. So Canada will be able to tell us much better what's happening to them. But as far as the Himalaya is concerned, the same kind of retreat, the glacial loss, we have the snow leopards and the blue sheep. The blue sheep habitat moves away. The snow leopard has nowhere to go because the blue sheep is their prey species. So, and then we have the, if you know the cordyceps fungus, that's the Himalayan gold. It's a fungus that grows on caterpillars. It's at Kira Jari, yes, and it's got medicinal properties, but they grow above a certain alpine height, at a certain height, which is also one of these frigid zones. Now that's too becoming, it's a commercially exploitable and very expensive species, but we seem to be losing that as well. And then permafrost. So for the Arctic, it's the red foxes versus the Arctic foxes. So the more the permafrost goes away, the greening of the Arctic happens. So instead of tundra, you have bushes growing everywhere, and that is the habitat of the red fox, which replaces the Arctic fox. And here along the Tibet, there was one study, the Qinghai Tibet Highway study, which talks about thermokarst lakes. That means the permafrost collapses, makes lakes, and then also contributes to the base flows of rivers. And that means that along this road, along a highway, only one highway, there was a 83% rise in the number of thermokarst lakes. So if a highway is going to be destroyed or unstable, so that would mean losses and damages to humans. So it's not only wildlife, it's not only human, it's the entire chain that is collapsing.
Thank you. I think we have our keywords. So the losses and damages are not limited to one part of it, but then it's interlinked. It goes from people to species to cultures, permafrost, the food insecurity, and the incompleteness in science which we have at present. So going to a positive note of the things and asking our knowledgeable speakers from their knowledge whether they have any innovative approaches, innovative financial models or breakthrough technology which they would like to propose, which can help us monitor and protect the Arctic biodiversity or monitor the biodiversity in real time. I would like to start with Mr. Swapn this time.
Sure. Thank you very much. So, two things. On the technology side, the one thing that I'd like to mention is that based on our work in the Himalayas on monitoring springs specifically, that's something that we are doing a lot in 3 states of India, which has its different challenges, of course, than measuring ice caps, permafrost, etc. But one thing that we've realized, and then the second is our work on general MRV of nature solutions, because we do a lot of work on investments in nature. One game changer that's arriving now is the availability of extremely varied and large networks of satellite sensors, which was not the case till even 10 years ago. In the last 5 years, there has been a spurt of new sensors. 2 specific initiatives that I like to mention here, which could be very relevant to work in the Arctic, include the Indo-US launch of the NISAR sensor, which is going to happen in June, which has L and S-band radar sensors. So it can easily overcome the challenges of cloud, which has prohibited a lot of use of remote sensing based assessment of ice cap melting, depth of ice, etc. And these radar sensors can permeate the ground. You can see below up to like even in ice, even 20 feet. The second is that the EU has just launched its biomass sensor, which is P-band radar, but is also very good for glaciology and glacial mapping. It was already launched. The data is going to be available very soon. The second thing is that there is now a lot of high resolution optical data. We were just doing some research on the fact that in the Arctics, because it's a large part of the vegetation is not forest vegetation, is non-forest vegetation, on mid-resolution data, you can't identify between ground strata and vegetation, but now you have such large constellations that you can get 5 centimeter, 10 centimeter resolution. I think that's one important thing to consider. Obviously, this all requires and needs to be supplemented with ground truthing. In our experience, at least in the work that we're doing in, for example, Meghalaya, all our ground truthing has been outsourced to local indigenous populations who are much better adept at being able to do ground truthing at lower costs, because to send a research team from Delhi cost us a lot. So I think those combinations need to be tried out. The second is computing. Today you can buy GPUs which can run machine learning algorithms at 1/100th of the price that you could 10 years ago. And even we get surprised very often with what kind of analysis these machine learning algorithms or procedures like ResNet, ForestNet, convolution network are able to come out with. It's surprising what results can come out. I think that those are one important technology update or change that we need to try it on. On financing, look, this is very tricky. You know, the ideal goal of people like me who focused on trying to push through ecosystem finance for many years has been that a standing healthy ecosystem should be able to compete economically in terms of returns with a dead or replaced ecosystem. Gets very tricky. Today, with carbon at a price of, let's say, $20, $30, there is instruments like biodiversity credits, which we are all working on. The way they are priced, it's very difficult to even compete, for example, on a parcel of land for a natural forest with even a commercial plantation like palm oil. Leave alone having discovered oil or a mineral in that land, then the economics just don't work. So I feel that for financing conservation of ecosystem as vital to the existence of humanity as the Arctic, we need to take sort of we need to take a very unique approach. We need to not be bound by what instruments exist anywhere else for conservation. I think some of the advantages here exists that this is by nature a multi-country ecosystem. So that's an advantage. It's a disadvantage, but it's also an advantage, because if one country is trying to push through a new economic approach, is very difficult. The second issue is that there is a need to custom design new instruments. One of the things that the insurance industry and many other industries have done at scale for things like infrastructure, which we haven't been able to do for ecosystems, is value and monetize future risk. Imagine being able to put a value on all the future storms in Europe and the US that the change in ocean currents will bring. Imagine being able to, yesterday I heard there was a presentation which shows that even India will lose agriculture productivity if we lose the Arctic. So imagine being able to put a figure on those hundreds of trillions of dollars of future loss and being able to monetize that. I think that's something that a lot of us have been trying to do for climate impacts locally, but this is one instrument. The second is value creation for conservation for communities. Again, I think that there is some possibilities of adaptation of these market instruments in the short term, like climate biodiversity, but they need to be designed very specific. Your traditional MRV approaches won't work here. Typically, a carbon credit is given to somebody who grows a tree or stops carbon from being emitted in a certain fixed area of land. How do you apply that to something as large as the permafrost, where you can't measure each and every unit? We need to think about this. It's possible. I read that one company is doing a very interesting experiment of using ocean water to clean black carbon deposits from ice and trying to measure that in terms of heating and convert that to carbon credits. So these instruments are possible. But I think at the very meta level, many of us who participate in these discussions, I'm also part of a World Economic Forum's Nature Future Global Council, in which we have a group of 7-8 of us thinking of how do you change the paradigm of nature investments. In many of these deliberations, we've come to a conclusion that there is actually no way to fit a paradigm which values nature properly in the current global economic paradigm. Till the time we keep measuring GDP the way we measure, till the time we keep focusing on corporations and their focus only on financial bottom lines. Till the time we have this paradigm, there is no way that we can internalize the value of what nature gives us fully. I think there is some unlearning and learning that we all need to do very immediately, because we can see that we are on the brink of an ecological collapse around the world. And to me, based on my 2 days of research, it seems to me that the Arctic actually should be the poster child of this whole revolution, because the decimation of these systems will impact everybody. So this is something that I'm going to take to my group, that we need to now start arguing from all of this from an Arctic perspective, that why you need to not look at nature just as something that you have to get on your financial balance sheet, but on your balance sheet of human health for posterity. And by the way, this is not something new. This is something that our indigenous cultures have practiced for millennia, right? Like even in our Upanishads, in one of our Upanishads in India, there are texts and verses which say that take from nature only as much as she can regenerate. So this is something, and I'm sure that there are equal number of anecdotes from Viking traditions and Inuit traditions, etc. So I think that paradigm shift has to be pushed forth, and this is a very good case to start discussing that. Right?
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Swapn. I think that was indeed very valuable. Professor, if I can ask your opinions here.
Absolutely. So to translate what he just said, the economic system is completely broken, or economics are broken. That's kind of what you were saying, right? And I think we need to go back to basics and think a bit about what is it that we want to do. We want to protect, conserve, restore nature. That's what this is all about. And we somehow need to be able to move our politicians and big donors in that direction. Okay. And I think for us to be able to do that, I'm not going to be very innovative at all. I'm just going to say what we need to do, we're going to need to sort of begin by completely changing the mindset over to enable everybody to understand the importance of nature, the importance of ecosystem services, and the multiple functions and services that ecosystems do for us, and of course, including the intrinsic impact or the intrinsic value of nature. This we really need to move forward, and this we really need to sort of foster internationally. Only with this type of understanding, we're going to be able to change paradigms. So that is something that we need to work on. Another thing, in terms of, again, not being innovative at all, another thing that I want to mention, to be able to move forward sort of investment in conservation, is that we need to change the current instruments that are being used. There are nature hurting instruments, policy instruments all over the world. There are subsidies currently being given that are harming nature. For example, in Iceland, just to give you a local example, farmers were being subsidized for draining wetlands. One example. There are examples like that all over the world. We need to get rid of these hurtful subsidies. And then, of course, we need to start pricing carbon. That's another thing. And sort of, and then in terms of financing, sort of a bit sort of linking to what you were saying, we also, when we're moving into sort of conservation and financing for conservation, we need to make sure that the local people are involved in that conversation. Absolutely critically important. They need to be involved. They need to be consulted. They need to benefit from that, from the conservation, from the protection and the restoration. So we need to make sure that is sort of that people or financiers keep that in mind. So just a few sort of 3 small things when it comes to not being innovative, when it comes to sort of the financing world. But thinking of sort of innovative actions, one thing that I've actually a bit missed at this conference is that we're talking about protecting biodiversity and protecting the ice and so on and so forth. Obviously, a key issue is to reduce emissions. That's what we need to do globally. That's where, a lot of the finance needs to go, of course. But but climate change is happening, so obviously we need to, fund adaptation and then conservation as well. But for us to really to be able to protect and and conserve and restore, we need to make sure that the species that we are using, that we're utilizing, they are managed properly. And a key issue there is that we invest in systems that enable us to really utilize what we take from nature to the best of our abilities, right? That we take as little as we need, okay? Yeah. And if we do that and make sure that we maximize the value of what we take out, that there's a big benefit to that. And I was going to give you one example of, for example, an Icelandic company that was able to do so. We live off our fish resources, so we're really dependent on our fish resources. And we need to protect the fish stocks. But there's a limit, and thereby there's a limited amount that we can actually take out. So the only way for us to increase the value of what we take is to utilize every single thing that we take from the ocean. So we have a project called 100% cod. So we utilize everything of what we actually take from the ocean. And we make sure that we maximize the value of what we take out. And one thing that we've done is that now we take the fish skin from the cod and we use that for medicinal purposes. And now the company that started doing that is one of the most valuable companies in Iceland. So investing in things like that, investing in things that really enable us to maximize the value of what we take, because we cannot take too much. We have to make sure that we sustainably manage sort of the resources that we're working with.
Can I vote for you?
Yeah. Vote for me?
Yeah.
Yes, please. No.
Great. Well, so many things to say, but maybe one thing very important. I don't think that technology, even if it's, very good to follow, the ice cap and all that, but technology help us to follow the loss that we created in a way, and I don't think that technology will save us. So we have to very often we think that technology will be the big saver, and it stopped the emergency feeling, and if we lose that, we're gone. We have to create something. We have, in communication also, we have to change, I think, the way that we present all that to the public. Mm-hmm. Nature is part of what we are, and we all love nature, so we want to protect what we like, so I think that this is so important. We have to try to embark everybody in that new mission, and it's not by putting a price on every tree, on every lake, on every wetland that we will, create, something that will protect things. I know that we will go there, though. I'm sure we will go there, but you will see the best greenwashing operation from all time, because it's going to be that, because every company, every government said we will be carbon neutral by 2050. Carbon neutral doesn't mean that you stop, having. It's just that what you emit and what you can capture is a balance at zero. So there's company now that are, creating credits, and I can talk about carbon pricing a little bit, because in Quebec, as you know, we have a market with California. in the big calculation, California use lots of trees to to put in the system. Where are those trees now in California? They're all burned. Do you think that the people who had those credit will reimburse? Of course not. And we did the real calculation on a tree, and if at the end there's a leftover of like 33%. So it's the value that human wants to give to things. It's not the real value. But if we don't have standards, really strict standards, it's going to be a real mess, I think. So, and it's funny because more and more, we all together come to those meetings trying to find solution. But also what we hear is we have to open new route. We have to have access to, critical minerals. We have to, take more and more and more. And I think maybe the problem is there. We have to slow down a little bit because we won't be able to continue to just take, from nature.
Okay, so the key word is to slow down. We need to slow down. Too much happening. But can we slow down? And can we transition? Now, these are the two questions. Now, we have this emission market in Surat, which took 10 years, one city. It's done by an economist. So they worked it out and they put it in place, and it took 10 years to do one city. It's supposed to be done for industry in every city. We have industries in every city, inside the city. But it isn't. It isn't going anywhere. So we have air pollution. Every city is choking. But we live in Delhi, we choke. Every winter we die here in a gas chamber. But we don't think two bits about it. So where does this stop, really? And I'll just come to this one. I just want to talk about who is in charge, really. We need to think about this. Who is in charge? There was a survey by the Oxford University here recently, 2024. And it was called Asking for Climate Action. So there was a survey that they did, globally they did this survey, and it was people through journalists and through media and through newspapers and all of that, they asked for a vote. That so it was 89% of countries such as us, the poorer countries, they opted. They said, yes, we need more climate action. 67% were from the richer and the more developed nations. So people want climate action. There is a difference. 89% of people are the have-nots, because we are have-nots, really. We really are not there. But the change that is happening in the Arctic, in the Himalaya, is impacting people in the global south much more. We have to realize that when we are saying 90% of the people of the global south or the lesser developed countries are saying that we need climate action. If there are so many people wanting climate action, why don't we have climate action? What is it where is the gap? I don't understand. There seems to be something seriously wrong. So where? I mean, even if we say innovative technology, we have technology in the air, we have technology in the space, we have technology under the water, we have technology under the ground, we have acoustics, we have buoys, we have, I don't know, you name it, we have it. And we have, you can even now have satellites which can pick up nematodes from the soil. The signatures, you have eDNA, you take a whiff of air and you put it through DNA culture, and you can take you'll actually have all our DNAs in that one sample. So one sample gives us the number of people who are in this room, and each of our DNAs in that sample, which is eDNA. And then what? So what do we do with all this? I don't know. It just flummoxes me. I am just completely at a loss to understand that if people are there, they are demanding, but we just don't get our way.
Yeah. Simple thoughts, but powerful. So we are ready to have questions. Yeah.
You had mentioned, this Kedarnath thing happened because of polar vortex, right? Amplification. Okay. So let me correct, because I was the one who had predicted that event in 2013. I was the director of the meteorological center there. First thing is that polar vortex is active during the winters. Okay. But as the March approaches, spring approaches, the sunlight comes and the polar vortex weakens and it disappears. And this event happened in June.
Yes, sir.
At that time, there is no polar vortex.
Krishnan's paper, sir, if you read it, there is a Canadian. This is the oscillation that happens after the. There is a paper. I will share the paper with you. It's Krishnan's paper, 2015.
No problem. No problem.
I will
this
share
is what I felt.
I will share the paper, sir.
Second thing I have to, Lemire, you said the technology cannot help, but I thought technology creates problem and technology only provides a solution. Like water, we have polluted through technology all the water, and then we put all those removing all the ions and the sort, and we get the fresh water. So I have understanding that technology creates problem as well as provides solution.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I'm not saying that technology, I'm not against technology. We use technology a lot, in decision. For example, just, we use lots of data on the field. We put that in supercomputer and it helps us creating new protected area, because we can calculate, the migration route of animals and all that. Of course, it helps. I'm just saying that it cut the feeling of emergency, because we count too much on technology.
I actually want to comment on that as well, because that is a big problem when it comes to climate action. Every 2 years, there is a technological solution which is proposed as the end of climate change, right? Like 2 years ago, 3 years ago, it was biochar. Then it was enhanced rock weathering. Now it's hydrogen. Now it's cloud seeding with sulfur. I think the key point, maybe I represent his opinion also, but at least mine is that we cannot continue to use tiny band-aids as a mirage for the hard work that all of us have to do, which is that we all have to reflect on lifestyles, consumption, all of that. So I think there is a point there that we cannot look at technology as a solution to everything. The problem with the world is that technology, so this is one of the key issues why there is more investments in technological climate solutions versus nature climate solutions. Because you can own an IP and you can get venture capital, private equity behind you, and then you have the money to say this technology will save everything, and then you get a lot of returns. There is no IP about how a tree grows. There is no IP about how soil works. And hence that doesn't get attention. So I think this is a very critical point, that we cannot project small technological solutions as the messiah of humanity. That's a problem, or messiah.
True. I think we have a question. Yeah. So we'll go with you.
Yeah, so Sulagana, you asked this question, who is in charge? I think only thing is in charge is nature. Okay, nature is only in charge of everything. So if you really look, we are talking here about how we will lose certain amount of biodiversity. There are some example of bears, polar bears and other things. They are postcard. You can send a postcard, say that polar bear is there. But a real issue is neither technology nor a real issue is what Professor Jean is saying is a step back. Because otherwise nature is going to push us back so much. Just imagine this, if we allow this climate change to happen, if permafrost melt in Arctic and it emits a lot of methane into the atmosphere, if Greenland ice sheet melts and it dumps into the Arctic Ocean and reduces its salinity and it stops the Gulf Stream, well, all your solutions are meaningless. Nature will take you at the stage where you don't know. where we are going to go. So all this thing is, to me, looks like we are trying to say that we want to exploit minerals in Arctic, we want to have new shipping lines, we want to have so many things, fantastic idea of commercial and economic thing. But what nature has kept us in store and what science is telling us, we are not working on that. We are working something which we still think can bring material benefit to us.
Yeah. So we have, I think, 3 questions in the room, and we'll take them. Sir, you can
Yeah,
start.
I think the net conclusion from this session is that the world is going to end, and so we
Sorry.
we are not going to be out of this room and all that.
Sorry. So let's
I-
make a big party.
Yes. But I want to point out one thing, that couple of maybe about 50 years back, the average age of man or a woman was around 50 or 60 years. Now it is about 75 years. So everything is not negative. There are still some positive things in the world. So let's hope for the best.
True.
One quick question for Swapanji, because you mentioned about your association with World Economic Forum, and we have heard a lot. So I have a very layman's question for you guys, because World Economic Forum works on water rejuvenation of water bodies or groundwater recharges, etc., or rejuvenation of forest lands. For the Arctic perspective, are there any such technologies which would be developed using advanced chemistry or engineering for rejuvenation of Arctic? And again, in a very layman's term, taking example of the movie Frozen, are there any ice princesses or any magic happening on the science side of it for this Arctic rejuvenation?
Sir, we'll take another question also, and then, yeah.
Hello. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think one slightly longest point plus question. I think there's the only time I felt really helpless is when I was on my Antarctic expedition, March 22nd, back in Ushuaia, and there was the news of the outbreak of the avian flu. We reached out to BBC, we told The Guardian, but we felt completely helpless because it was inevitable. There's some pristine regions. I've been to the Gulf of St. Lawrence and the Harp Seal pups in Edward Island, Hornstrandir in Iceland, or the Arctic foxes. A lot of these animals feed on migratory species. There's a pod of orcas which goes between Shetland and Iceland. Polar bears in Churchill, at the Churchill Northern Studies Center, they are doing some work along with Polar Bears International as well. But polar bears, walruses, seals, there have been reported cases of avian flu. There's nothing that we can do at the moment to prevent it, right? But are we prepared to handle the scale of devastation that can happen? How do we work towards it?
Okay. First question for Mr. Swapan.
I actually do not have an answer to that, and I'll defer if somebody else does, if there are some magic solutions for the Arctic that can be implemented. I don't think there are. I think that one critical thing is that this region is almost entirely affected by actions that are outside this region. So while you can do local adaptation, you can do local supportive work, the impact is so huge that there will be crises and catastrophes unless we overall change the climate paradigm. There are some locally referenced adaptation actions that are available, but those are to adapt to the disaster, not to avoid the disaster.
And the other question about the avian flu. Anybody wants to take it?
Well, it shows the importance of biodiversity. We were very lucky with COVID because it was not, well, it was, of course, very dangerous and all that, but the fact that biodiversity has more contact with human will bring more, situation like that. And I mean, it showed that biodiversity needs habitat. And this is what we have to conclude, I think, because it's very positive when you go in nature, in their habitat, and you see all the wildlife around. I mean, it's just great. I spent 430 days in Antarctica. I overwinter there. And the feeling that I have from nature, I mean, it's just amazing. So we should go in nature, get inspired, and then we will create a new ambassador for nature, and maybe we will change that mentality of always taking more and more and more.
I think although it wasn't a question, but a quick response to your point, sir. I don't think that everything is lost, but I also feel that we should acknowledge that we are at the brink of ecological disaster. Because till the time we don't acknowledge that, I don't think we can solve it. I think we as a race have the power to solve it, but we are not doing enough right now. No, so I don't think so. I don't think so, sir. I think we are pushing it much more than nature would have.
I think that gives us topic for another panel session, which we can have.
No.
Yeah. With this, I would like to close the session and thank our speakers and the lovely audience and ORF and Arctic Circle for organizing this panel. Thank you.